That song. Hod vehadar, splendor and glory surround the Holy One. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Shavua Tova, good vach, good week to you. Let's start it off beautifully with some lighting up the darkness. Who is with us on a Saturday night as we gather to do some learning to kick off the week? Pauline in Arkansas, Stephen in New Hampshire, Yehuda in South Carolina, James in Indianapolis, Nancy in North Carolina, Patrice in Utah, Tom in PA, Bella in Florida, Debbie in New Jersey, Adam in Fort Myers, Bill in mid-Missouri, Sharon just came back from post-Havdalah klezmer concert. I hope it was great. I bet it was. In New Jersey, Shandora in the Bronx, Karen in Northern California, Melissa in Great Neck. Welcome, welcome, everybody. David loves the music. Margaret in Puerto Rico, bienvenida. And over there on the YouTube side, Lynn in North Texas. Great to be with you all. It was a beautiful Shabbos. I heard a wonderful talk. My friend Baruch Cohen every year gives a lecture on the yard site, tragically, of his daughter that was left this world 18 years ago. And he did a beautiful sort of reconceiving, reimagining, reifying our understanding of the relationship between the sisters, Rachel and Leah, and the way in which, Rachel saw herself as, this victim. She allowed Leah to marry her husband, Jacob, to marry him first by giving him the signs. This is a midrash. That Rachel and Jacob had these secret signs because they knew that her father might try to trick him under the wedding canopy, and then Rachel gave those secret signs, as it were, to her sister Leah so that she wouldn't be humiliated. Then Leah had child after child after child. Rachel had trouble conceiving, just like Rivka, Jacob's mother, and Sarah, Isaac's mother. And it was really, really difficult for Rachel, very tough life, and watching her sister have child after child. And then, there's this incident where Leah's son Reuven comes back with the dudayim, these flowers that perhaps they're aphrodisiac, perhaps they create fertility for a woman, or perhaps they were just a gift, said my friend Baruch, from the young boy Reuven to his mother, the same way the first time one of our kids makes a drawing and gives it, to mom and dad, and we treasure it, put it on the refrigerator, and might be hanging there years or decades later. And Rachel says, I don't want to be that jealous sister stewing in my rage, watching you have child after child. It's almost like, let me be the aunt who participates in the life of the children. Let me share in these flowers. And Leah freaks out. It's not enough you stole my husband. Now you want to steal the flowers of my child. And Rachel, I think we would all be just so tempted to shout back, stole your husband. I gave you your husband. But what does Rachel do instead? Rachel says, wait a minute. I've been viewing this from my perspective. I'm the victim all these years. How has Leah looked at this? Leah, she didn't choose to go under the wedding canopy and be married to Jacob, in this trickery that her father Lavan arranged. But she had to go through that. Rachel had a choice to then become the second wife, as it were. And over the years, yes, Leah had children, but Jacob clearly loved Rachel, went to her for companionship, spent time with her, and put Leah in that position of the despised wife, the hated wife, the unloved wife. And how difficult that must have been for Leah. And now Rachel, sees it from her sister's point of view, sheds tears for her sister, says, fine, if that is so, you take Jacob tonight. You have our husband tonight. And from that union of Jacob and Leah on that night comes the son Issachar. And what Baruch said this is related to the same phrase in two words, yesh sachar, there is reward, which we hear in Jeremiah when he's saying that Rachel, who's crying along, because Rachel is buried on the road that all the children of Israel passed as refugees of war at the Babylonian conquest and Babylonian exile. They're all streaming off to Babylon. And Jeremiah imagines Rachel in her grave crying and God saying to her, you will be comforted. There is reward for your tears. And so what is that reward? Just for crying? No, it's reward for seeing the perspective of another person, your rival, and overcoming it. Beautiful, beautiful teaching that I heard tonight. Wanted to share a little bit of that with you. All right, our daf tonight, where are we? Daf Yud Zayin, page 17 here in Tractate Chagigah. We are in chapter 2, and tonight we'll be opening and reading Mishna number 3 and sharing the commentary on it. We picked this up a few lines from the top on 17a. Beis Shammai say one may bring peace offerings on a festival because both the owners and the priests partake of them, but one may not place his hands on them. We've seen this debate before between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and this idea that when you're bringing festival offerings, two issues emerge. Right, because you're going to be slaughtering an animal, right? And slaughtering is something that is prohibited on Shabbos and permitted on the festival because it's part of preparing a meal, right? We can't do any of the labors of Shabbos on a festival except those which are connected to cooking and preparing a meal. Okay, so you can slaughter an animal in order to have a meal, and you can slaughter an animal to be a peace offering because people eat part of the peace offering. Some of it goes up in smoke on the altar as a pleasing aroma to God. Some is eaten by the people. But what about the burnt offering, which is consumed entirely on the altar and nobody eats of it? You might have thought that it is not permitted to bring burnt offerings on the festival unless we're commanded to do so. Beis Hillel say, yes, of course you can eat burnt offerings, because why should our table be filled and we're thanking God for filling our table with a festive meal, and God's table, as it were, would be empty because the burnt offerings are what God eats on the festival, sort of metaphorically speaking. And then the other issue that we've already been talking about the last few days is this idea of laying one's hands on an offering, semicha. When you place your hands on an animal prior to offering, that's part of the offering process. All of this is when the temple is standing. We haven't done this in thousands of years. But the way to properly do semicha is to put all your weight on the animal. And if so, then the animal is bearing the burden of a person. And this is a consecrated animal. Okay, so you can bear the weight of a person because we're commanded to do semicha. But what about on the festival when the animal can't be worked? Maybe we bring the offering, but we don't do semicha. That's the position of Beis Shammai. But Beis Hillel say we bring the offerings and we do semicha, and that is the halacha. So this is the Mishnah that we are now discussing. Beis Shammai say one may bring peace offerings on a festival because both the owners and the priests partake of them, but one may not place hands on them, on the peace offerings before sacrificing them. However, one may not bring burnt offerings at all because they are not eaten, and labor is permitted on festivals only for the sake of preparing food for humans. But Beis Hillel say one may bring peace offerings and also burnt offerings, and one does place hands on both of them. If the festival of Shavuos occurs on the eve of Shabbos, right? So Shavuos lands on Friday. Beis Shammai say the day of slaughter is after Shabbos, on Sunday. This is the day on which the animals brought in honor of the Pilgrim Festival are slaughtered, since they maintain that the festival burnt offering is not sacrificed on the festival day itself, but on the following day. And all burnt offerings vowed by individuals are postponed to the following day. And Beis Hillel say the day of slaughter is not after Shabbos. Since the slaughter may be performed on the festival day itself, it is unnecessary to postpone it. But they concede that if Shavuos occurs on Shabbos, then the day of slaughter is after Shabbos. And the Mishna relates that when the day of slaughter was on a Sunday, the high priest would not dress in his festive garments, but would wear his regular clothing. And all were permitted to eulogize and fast on this day. This was done in order not to uphold and reinforce the opinion of the Sadducees, who would say Shavuos must always occur after Shabbos, as the day of slaughter was on a Sunday, and it was necessary to demonstrate that we do not accept the view of the Sadducees and that the day is not a festival. That day, that according to Beis Shammai, this day of slaughter would become after the festival, since we don't bring those offerings on the festival itself, certain offerings. That's not the law, but according to that view. And so if that day was going to end up being Saturday, then you postpone it till Sunday. Now that there's this other view that's involved here, that Shavuos always lands on a Sunday, and that is not a view that we accept. That comes from the Boethusians. Let's have this note from Rav Steinsaltz to help clarify what we're talking about here. Who would say that Shavuos must always occur after Shabbos. According to Tractate Rosh Hashanah on page 22a, it was the Boethusians, a cult that broke away from the traditions of the sages, who maintained this view. And they explained the verse, and you shall count for yourselves from the morrow of Shabbos, Leviticus 23:15, as referring to the Shabbos that occurs during Passover. Our sages interpret that in that context, Shabbos doesn't refer to Saturday, it refers to the day of rest that we observe on Passover, right? The second day of Passover, the morrow of Passover. That's how we start counting the 7 weeks toward the holiday of Shavuos on the second day of Passover, the day after the day of rest, which is the festival of Passover. But these Boethusians had an alternative reading of the text, which did not become law. So they explained the verse, and you shall count for yourselves from the morrow of Shabbos as referring to the Shabbos that occurs during the week of Passover. Accordingly, the festival of Shavuos in their calendar would always fall on a Sunday. Now, the members of this sect, who were allies of the Sadducees, not the same group, but what they had in common is rejecting the authority of the sages who transmitted the oral tradition all the way back to Mount Sinai. They were saying only the written Torah and our reading of the written Torah trumps your tradition. They lost this battle and they're forgotten from history except in the text of the oral tradition. So the members of this sect, who were allies of the Sadducees, constituted a minority of the Jewish people at the time. But it appears that they were powerful and wealthy, and they were even prepared to deploy various types of manipulation and deceit to ensure that all would follow their practices. For this reason, the sages found it necessary to institute several decrees to counter their views in order to emphasize and publicly demonstrate that the Boethusian approach is to be entirely rejected. Okay, that was our Mishnah. Now the Gemara. Rabbi Elazar said that Rabbi Oshaya said, from where is it derived that the Shavuos offerings can be redressed? Right, we've talked about this concept of redressing an offering, that for some reason you were unable to bring the festival peace offerings on the day of the festival, on the first day of Passover, the first day of Sukkot, so you have all week to bring that offering. If you were exempt from bringing it on the first day, then you remain exempt the rest of the days, because those days aren't days to bring offerings, they're days of redress in case you weren't able to bring the required offerings on the day of the festival. Now, Shavuos is a one-day festival in the land of Israel. Outside of Israel, it's 2 days, but that has to do with the as we've discussed many times about the calendar, when the Sanhedrin would declare a new month, and it would take a time for the word to get out from Jerusalem when the new month had been declared. But Shavuos is a one-day festival in Israel, so what would it mean that like the days after Shavuos would be an opportunity to redress for not having brought, for some reason being unable to bring the festival offering on the day itself of Shavuos. It's a one-day festival. We don't have all these other days of the festival to make up for it. As we'll see, the sages declared that like Passover and Sukkot, Shavuos may be a one-day festival that starts 50 days after Passover, but you do have a week to make that redress, because it's a pilgrimage festival, right? And having gone to Jerusalem, made that pilgrimage, walking in ancient times, you probably would hang out in Jerusalem for a few days, not just return the very next day. And so they say that you have this entire week to bring offerings in case you couldn't bring it on the first day. So Rabbi Elazar said that Rabbi Oshaya said, from where is it derived that the Shavuos offerings can be redressed, i.e. that the obligatory festival offerings can be sacrificed all 7 days following the festival of Shavuos, as it is stated, 3 times a year all your males shall appear, on the festival of Passover, and on the festival of Shavuos, and on the festival of Sukkot. And the verse compares the festival of Shavuos to the festival of Passover by analogy. Just as one can redress the failure to bring the offering on the festival of Passover on all 7 days of the festival, so too on the festival of Shavuos, one can redress the failure to bring the offering for all 7, i.e. Shavuos and the 6 days following it. Now, the Gemara raises a difficulty. But perhaps you should say instead that the verse compares Shavuos to the festival of Sukkot by analogy, just as the festival of Sukkot can be redressed for all 8 days, as the 8th day of assembly, Shmini Atzeres, is part of the festival, so too can the festival of Shavuos be redressed all 8 days. And the Gemara answers the 8th day of assembly, Shmini Atzeres, is an independent pilgrimage festival, and it is not considered part of Sukkot. But the Gemara continues to ask, wait a minute, you can say that when they said that Shmini Atzeres is an independent pilgrimage festival, this applies to the issue of Pei, Zayin, Reish, Kuf, Shin, Beis, which is an acronym for the 6 laws that differentiate Shmini Atzeres from the festival of Sukkot. But with regard to the redress of the festival offerings, it is considered a day of redress for the first festival day, as we learned in a Mishna on page 9a, one who did not celebrate by sacrificing the festival offerings on the first day of Sukkot may celebrate by sacrificing them throughout the pilgrimage festival of Sukkot and the last day of the festival, which is Shmini Atzeres. You can redress all 8 days. So just as you can do that for Sukkot, why not give 8 days for the redress on Shavuos? Why don't we compare Shavuos to Sukkot in the same way? And the Gemara answers that by summoning a principle we've seen a bunch of times. If you grasp many, you did not grasp anything. If you grasped few, you grasped something. Meaning, when one must choose between a smaller number and a larger one, there is more certainty in choosing the smaller one. Even if that choice turns out to be erroneous, it is preferable to the larger one as it is included in it. In this case, 7 is included in 8, right? Like better a bird in the hand than 2 in the bush. For sure, you know that 7 works. 7 is common to both holidays in this sense. 8 maybe is right, maybe is wrong. You might have made a mistake. 7 makes more sense. It's a safer choice. So we choose that, and that is the choice that the sages made. And the Gemara asks, but if we do not compare Shavuos to Sukkot, for the sake of what law did the merciful one write the festival of Sukkot in this context? The laws of all the festivals were already listed, so the Torah must have mentioned their names again in order to compare them for a particular reason. Well, we've already laid out the laws of Pesach and Shavuos and Sukkot. Now that they're mentioned again in the book of Deuteronomy, as you shall show up for all 3, having already told us that we need to show up for all 3, why are they being brought together in this context? It must be, the sages say, it must be for the sake of teaching us a new law. What is that? And the Gemara answers, the festival of Sukkot was mentioned in order to compare it by analogy to the festival of Pesach, Passover, in the following manner. Just as the festival of Pesach requires lodging overnight in Jerusalem after the conclusion of the festival, as one may not depart that night, so too the festival of Sukkot requires lodging in Jerusalem after Sukkot has ended. Right? Sukkot, it's a festival on the Hebrew calendar, and like every day on the Hebrew calendar, it begins at nightfall, and so it ends at sunset the next day. So you might have thought, okay, so Sukkot ends the following evening, and once it's dark, I can go home. I can get out, hit the road, get back to my home outside of Jerusalem. No, we actually have a halakha, a law, a requirement that you don't hit the road until the next morning, right? You only set out for travel daytime. Good principle. Sure, we have red-eye flights now, where we have headlights on our cars. It's not nearly as dangerous to travel by night as it was in ancient times. Nevertheless, that law was established after you go for a pilgrimage festival to Jerusalem. You don't leave until the next morning. And the Gemara asks, and there, with regard to Pesach itself, from where do we derive that it requires lodging that night after the festival has ended? Now we're on 17b. It's a short page tonight. The Gemara answers, one may leave Jerusalem only in the morning, after staying there for the night following the festival, as it is written, following the laws of the Paschal offering, and you shall turn in the morning and go to your tents. Deuteronomy 16:7. We learned in the Mishna, if the festival of Shavuos occurs on the eve of Shabbos, meaning Friday, Beis Shammai say the day of slaughter is after Shabbos, meaning Sunday, and Beis Hillel say it does not have a day of slaughter. We just slaughter the offerings on Friday. What? Is it not that it does not have a day of slaughter at all? I.e., there are no days of redress for an offering that was meant to be sacrificed on the festival of Shavuos itself. And the Gemara rejects this. No. Beis Hillel means that it does not require a day of slaughter. The Gemara asks, meaning, right, as we explained before, that Beis Hillel say you can bring burnt offerings on Shavuos. It was Beis Shammai that say you don't bring them on the festival, so you bring them the next day. Since this Shavuos could fall on a Friday, then you wouldn't bring them on Shabbos, you'd bring them on Sunday. Beis Hillel say this whole thing is unnecessary because we bring burnt offerings on Shavuos itself. And the Gemara asks, and what does this teach us? That all offerings are sacrificed on their day? But they have already disputed this once, as we learned in a Mishnah. Beis Shammai say, one may bring peace offerings on a festival, but one may not place his hands on them. However, one may not bring burnt offerings at all. And Beis Hillel say, one may bring peace offerings and also burnt offerings, and one does place hands on both of them. So why is it necessary to restate the same argument in different terms? It must be that when we say about this day of slaughter, they're talking about something else. And the Gemara answers, no, that is what they're talking about, and it is necessary to restate it. For had the Mishnah taught us only this case, that Beis Shammai prohibits bringing burnt offerings on a festival, we might have said, well, it is with regard to this particular case, a regular festival followed by a weekday, that Beis Shammai state their opinion, because it is possible to sacrifice these burnt offerings on the following day, on the day of slaughter after the festival. But there, with regard to a Shavuos that occurs on a Friday, when one cannot sacrifice offerings on the following day, you might perhaps say that they agree with Beis Hillel, that the burnt offerings should be sacrificed on the festival itself. It was therefore necessary to state that Beis Shammai's view is the same in both cases. We don't bring burnt offerings on the festival, and this is how we deal with it when Shavuos falls on a regular weekday or on a Friday. And the reverse also applies. And had it taught us only that case, that there is no day of slaughter after Shabbos, we might have said, well, it is with regard to that case that Beis Hillel state their view that the offerings should be sacrificed on the festival itself, because it is not possible to sacrifice them on the following day, which is Shabbos. But here on a regular festival day, which is followed by a weekday, you might have thought that perhaps Beis Hillel would agree with Beis Shammai, and that you would wait one day to bring burnt offerings. It is therefore, and they don't, and so it is therefore necessary for the Mishnah to specify both cases. And the question of whether the days of redress for Shavuos, according to Beis Hillel, whether there are days of redress for Shavuos according to Beis Hillel, therefore remains unresolved, right? So they were talking about whether or not you slaughter offerings on the day itself or the next day. The Gemara had asked, perhaps what they're really talking about is whether there are days of redress or not, whether it's one whole week that you can bring those offerings, those obligatory festival offerings, for the 6 more days if you, for some reason, were prevented from bringing it on the festival day itself. The Gemara is now telling us that question, there are days of redress, it wasn't being addressed in this particular debate between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. I think they both agree that there are days of redress. And the Gemara suggests, come in here a proof from a different source. One who did not celebrate by sacrificing the peace offerings of the festival on the 7 days of Passover, or on the 8 days of Sukkot, or on the first day of Shavuos, may no longer celebrate and sacrifice those offerings. Meaning you could do it for all the days, but once the whole week passes, then you can't bring it anymore. But wait a minute, what about Shavuos? Now you're saying only 1 day for Shavuos? The Gemara infers, does this not mean that if one did not sacrifice on the festival day of Shavuos itself, that this lapse cannot be remedied, thereby demonstrating that there are no days of redress for Shavuos? And the Gemara refutes this. No! The term festival day is referring to the day of slaughter rather than the festival itself. The Gemara immediately counters, well, if so, let us at least resolve from here, i.e., the Mishna, that there is only 1 day of slaughter and not 7 days. But the Gemara rejects this. Say that the wording of the Mishnah should be corrected, so that instead of a day of slaughter, it reads days of slaughter, right? They know very clearly what the law is, that there is a whole week of days of redress. They encounter a Mishnah which seems to suggest otherwise, and this is one of those rare cases where they say the Mishnah got transmitted wrong, we need to amend the Mishnah. And the Gemara suggests further, come in here a proof from another source, as Rabbi Bar Shmuel taught the following Baraisa. The Torah said to count 30 days, as it is stated, a month of days, and then sanctify the month with offerings. And the Torah also said to count days from Passover. Hold on one second. But the Torah said to count 30 days, a month of days, and then sanctify the month with offerings, meaning Rosh Chodesh, right? So Rosh Chodesh is you have the offerings of the new month. And the Torah also said count days from Passover, and then sanctify the festival of Shavuos with offerings. As it is stated, you shall count 50 days from the morrow of the Shabbos, meaning not Shabbos, but in this case, a day of rest, which is Passover. So you start counting on the second day of Passover, 50 days brings us to Shavuos. From this comparison, we learn the following law. Just as Rosh Chodesh, a new Hebrew month, is sanctified for the unit of time by which it is counted, i.e. for 1 day, we count days, and so we sanctify Rosh Chodesh for 1 day. And then it became 2 days only because of the problem of the Sanhedrin declaring that a new month had started and how long it took for the word to get out. But normally Rosh Chodesh is 1 day. So too, Shavuos is sanctified for the unit of time by which it is counted, i.e. 1 full week. As it is stated, 7 complete weeks shall there be. Leviticus 23:17. So you sanctify a whole week for Shavuos. But the Gemara infers from this, does this not mean that we learn from the month? If so, we can learn that just as the festival of a month, meaning Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, is sanctified for 1 day, so too Shavuos is only 1 day, without days of redress, right? Shavuos, what are you talking about? We counted 50 days. If we're going to say we're going to sanctify that festival for the amount of time by which we count before we reach it, but we said we count 50 days. But the Torah also says we count weeks. Rava said, and how can you understand it that way? Is that to say that Shavuos, that for Shavuos we count days, but we do not count weeks? Didn't Abaye said, it is a mitzvah, it is a commandment to count days in the counting of the Omer, as it is written, until the morrow of the 7th week, you shall count 50 days. And it is also a mitzvah, a commandment to count weeks. As it is written, 7 weeks shall you count for yourself from when the sickle is first put to the standing corn. That's Deuteronomy 16:9. And further, it is written, the festival of weeks, Shavuos. Shavuos means weeks. That's what the word means, weeks. So of course, there has to be some kind of week-long aspect to Shavuos. Since the festival is only one day long, what is its week-long aspect? The days of redress if you're unable to bring the offering on the first day of the festival. In the school of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, a sage taught the following. The verse states with regard to Shavuos, and you shall make a proclamation on this very day. It shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no kind of laborious work. Leviticus 23:21. And it states in the same chapter, and when you reap the harvest of your land, which is the festival on which you make a proclamation and also reap, and when you reap the harvest of your land, Leviticus 23:22. Asks the Gemara, which is the festival on which you make a proclamation and also reap, i.e., which festival occurs in the harvest season? You must say that it is the festival of Shavuos. Now the Gemara analyzes this teaching. When exactly does this refer to? If we say it is referring to the festival day itself, is it permitted to reap on a festival? You don't do farm work on a festival. Obviously, ordinary work is prohibited on festivals. Rather, is it not referring to the issue of redress? In other words, it speaks of those days on which redress can be made for the offerings of the festival, i.e. the days of slaughter, on which one may indeed reap because they are regular weekdays and they nevertheless have a festive quality. We might go back to work the day after Shavuos, but that whole week which follows Shavuos has somewhat of a sacred character, as we're learning here on tonight's daf. And the Gemara comments, and even though the teaching that Rabbi Elazar said that Rabbi Oshaya said, that the halacha of the redress for Shavuos is derived from the comparison to Passover was stated, it was nevertheless necessary to state the teaching of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov as well. For if we had learned only the proof that Rabbi Elazar said, that Rabbi Oshaya said, I would say the following. Just as on the days of redress, for the festival of Pesach, it is prohibited to perform any work that will not cause irretrievable loss. Right? That's what we learned in the previous tractate, Moed Katan. There's only certain kinds of work that are permitted on the intermediate days of the festival. So do the days following Shavuos have that same kind of restriction that you can work, but only if it's to prevent an irretrievable loss and it doesn't require too much effort? Or is that the quality, that the rule that we're going to ascribe to the days following Shavuos? We are therefore taught the statement of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov as well, that on those festive days one may reap as they are weekdays. And conversely, if we learn the halacha only from the words of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, I would not know how many days of redress there are. And the Gemara therefore teaches us from the statement of Rabbi Elazar that Rabbi Oshaya said that there are 7 days of redress and we do work on those days. And Reish Lakish said, providing a different proof, from the very name of the day and the festival of harvest, Exodus 23:16, we can learn the following. On which festival do you celebrate and harvest? You must say it is Shavuos. When exactly does this apply? If we say it on the festival day, is harvesting permitted on a festival? Rather, it must be referring to the days of redress. And Rabbi Yochanan said to Reish Lakish, however, that is so. You should likewise say with regard to the festival of gathering, on which festival is there gathering? Well, you must say that is Sukkot. When exactly? If we say it on the festival day, is labor permitted on the festival? No. Rather, it is referring to the intermediate festival days. But on the intermediate festival days, is it permitted? Do we go out and do laborious farm work? No. One may perform only work that, if neglected, would result in irretrievable loss. Rather, you must explain that the festival of gathering is referring to the season of the year, i.e. the festival that occurs during the time of gathering. And here too, the festival of harvest means a festival that occurs during the season of harvest. So does that mean we have days of redress? Does that mean that they have a festive quality? Does that mean that we're allowed to work but only minor work, or that we have full permission to work? Tune in tomorrow. All right, that's where we leave off tonight. Let me see if there are questions or comments on this page 17 of Tractate Chagigah. And you know what? I was wanting to look up while this page is reloading. If I can find it really fast. I'm just wondering, do we have Tachanun? Obviously, we don't have Tachanun on Shavuos, but what about for that week after Shavuos, which are days of redress for Shavuos? Is that a time when we don't say Tachanun? I don't know if there's going to be a list of days in this siddur or not. On the days when Tachanun is not said, on Rosh Chodesh, Hol HaMoed, Hanukkah, Hala recited. This is not a list. So maybe somebody could quickly look up. I just don't remember. Is there a bunch of days, a week of days after Shavuos when we don't say Tachanun because there is that festive quality? I'm not sure. Okay. Adam says, Boethusians, I've read different things on them. How were they really? Sadducee or just splinter? And I think, from that note of Rav Steinsaltz, related, sort of, they were allies in having a common enemy, which is, the rabbis, the sages, transmitting the oral Torah. Both the Sadducees and the Boethusians didn't hold by it because they were wealthy and powerful. They were a real thorn in the sides of the sages. And that's why we've seen a bunch of times that they would do things like make the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, before Yom Kippur, in his preparation for Yom Kippur, swear that he was not under the influence of the Sadducees or the Boethusians and other practices like the one we named here tonight, just to demonstrate to the people that we don't hold by them. Tom, I don't remember if we covered this, but if you, for some legitimate reason, could not celebrate the Pesach Seder on the first night, could you hold the first Seder on another night, not the second Seder? It's a great question, Tom. I mean, when we talk about the days of redress during Passover, that's simply for, if you fail to bring the obligatory offerings of the Passover day itself, you could bring them for the rest of the week. That the Seder doesn't replace the offering, right? The Seder is something that we had that night anyway, and I'm not aware of any tradition that you would have a Seder on a different night, like say outside of Israel, so you have a second Seder anyway, and then you couldn't have your first Seder on the first night. Could you have it on the third night? I'm not aware of that. If you learned something new, please let me know. It's another question, like if you couldn't have a Seder on the first night, could you have it on Pesach Sheni, right? That second Passover, which is a month later, which was for people who were, excluded from bringing offerings, either because they were tameh, ritually impure, or too far away from Jerusalem in order to be able to come to Jerusalem for the holiday, so they could come and slaughter the Paschal Lamb a month later. But I'm not aware, that we would use that as a reason to have a Seder on Pesach Sheni. If you hear different, let me know. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us tonight. It's been great learning with you on a Saturday night. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific on Sunday. Shavua Tov, a good vach to you.